is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. In the next 60 minutes, we'll run through all the business news stories you need to know about from across Africa and beyond. But let's start with a quick run through the African equity markets for you. So East Africa's largest bank by assets, KCB, is on course to become even bigger, courtesy of its shotgun wedding, if you will, with National Bank. Shareholders of the latter approved the conversion of about 1.13 billion preference shares that are held by the government and the National Pension Fund into ordinary shares. KCB shares, however, they're down by 10% so far in this quarter. That's actually a lot worse than the NSE 20. That is down by about 5% over the same time frame. Here's what's coming up tonight. The president of the DRC wraps up a two-day state visit in Tanzania. South African authorities are being sued for continued air pollution in the Highveld Priority Area. And we'll also be taking a look at an app that could hold a solution to some transport challenges in Lagos. All that and more is coming up for you tonight. But our starting point is Tanzania, more specifically Tanzania and the DRC. Tanzania's President John Pombe Magufuli has applauded the DRC's application to join the East African community. He held a national ceremony in honor of his counterpart, President Felix Tshisekedi from the DRC. The Congolese head of state has been visiting the EAC countries ever since he assumed office in January this year to secure ties and enhance trade. Here's CGTN's Daniel Kijo with this report.
DRC's President Felix Tshisekedi wants to make history. Just months into his presidency, he has already visited 3 East African countries, and now he's in Tanzania with the aim of boosting mutual growth. President Magufuli was receptive, with both leaders pledging to combat poverty and improve the lives of over 140 million Congolese and Tanzanians. Despite this, there are only 8 Congolese investment projects registered in Tanzania, valued at just $5 million.
We both realize the necessity to increase the possibilities of these economic exchanges in order to reinforce economic growth. We recognize the low economic exchange between the two countries.
President Tshisekedi toured the standard gauge railway site where the project to construct a standard gauge railway is implemented. He also visited the Dar es Salaam port that is being expanded so it can handle containers, doubling its capacity to handle cargo.
He told me how satisfied he was with the construction of the standard gauge and the services given at our port. He said he is going to plan on how they can effectively use the Dar es Salaam port, especially as we promised to sort out the small nuisances that existed.
As it stands, the port has a capacity to handle between 3,000 and 4,000 containers. Expansion will push that up to some 6,000 containers per year. According to government statistics, the DRC leads in terms of transit goods that pass through via the port of Dar es Salaam, with Zambia coming second. So with this renewed commitment, it is expected that this port and the SGR railway will be a key artery to facilitate economic growth for both countries. DRC already accounts for about 6% of total export from the EAC countries, but membership of the group could be transformational. Daniel Kijo, CGTN, Dar es Salaam, Tanzania.
All right then, so quite a bit of pass through from that state visit. CGTN's Daniel Kijo joins us now live from Dar es Salaam. So walk us through the broad outlines here, Daniel, of what essentially was agreed to between these two parties today.
Hello, Rama. There are various issues that have been agreed on, but most of them fall into the main agenda for the visit, which was to promote bilateral relations between the DRC and Tanzania. The president agreed to collaborate on the construction of infrastructure projects like various roads that connect the two countries, as well as improving the aviation sector, in the hope that perhaps one day Air Tanzania would be able to fly into some cities into the DRC. A big point of discussion was strengthening
strengthening the services that the Tanzania Ports Authority provides to the DRC business community. President Magufuli has promised to work on improving processing time so as to avoid inconveniences when DRC community business communities are transiting goods from Tanzania to the DRC. Now, considering that the DRC leads in the number of transit goods that pass through this Dar es Salaam ports, the presidents clearly want to iron out any challenges also that affect or trade barriers, so as they can promote economic opportunities for people of these two countries. The two parties also agreed that they would not have any economic progress without peace and stability. President Magufuli assured President Felix Tshisekedi of the DRC that Tanzania will not remove its peacekeepers in the DRC and will until permanent peace is achieved in the country. So the peacekeepers are still going to be in the DRC under United Nations Stabilization Mission, the MONUSCO. Now, President Tshisekedi also showed interest in expanding the SGR railway. So in general, most of the discussion was around this area, Ramah.
Indeed, I'm glad you brought up the standard gauge rail line, because he also proposed extending the rail link via SGR into the DRC. But how much money is the DRC willing to put into its section of the line, assuming it does get extended all the way west?
Well, Rama, this intention was communicated today, and a bit of context on the SGR, or the standard gauge rail for Tanzania, is that it is currently under construction, and once it's completed, it will link the country to its neighboring countries, including Uganda, Rwanda, and through these two to Burundi and the DRC. Now, with the new standard gauge railway, it's intended to replace the old meter gauge railway system. So far, the DRC president has not stated any number, or any engagements of payments of the section to their railway line. But if it is to extend, we would expect to hear something soon.
Indeed. Is there any progress, at least off the talks that we saw today, is there any progress on putting in an interim or maybe even replacing the single customs territory agreement, which was terminated in February last year?
Rabah, as it stands, all indicators point that these two presidents are looking to strengthen trade relations between them. Now, both of them are seeing the Dar es Salaam port as a key player in, of course, improving this trading. The port is now being extended to be able to process up to 6,000 containers. But as you said, indeed, last year, Tanzania did cancel the single customs territory agreement with the DRC. And as you know, under this single customs agreement, all partners are regarded as one customs territory. Now, seeing that this has not worked, and also this being the very first initial visit, the finance minister for Tanzania has been tasked to work with his counterpart from the DRC to be able to work out and design a modality that would allow both parties to benefit and work for them to ensure that, in terms of custom and all the processing of goods from the port to DRC is eased.
Indeed, we'll have to see how all of that plays out. Thank you for the update. That's Daniel Kijo there, live in Dar es Salaam. Now, we're still within East Africa. Authorities in Uganda are carrying out a major investigation into the transportation of currency notes by the central bank. Why is that happening? Well, 8 central bank officials have been held. Here's CGTN's Leon Senyange explaining why.
The matter under investigation involves a recent consignment from France, where Uganda's central bank had procured new currency notes. Last April, the central bank transported additional pallets on a chartered plane than had been listed on the inventory. A statement by the central bank governor says the bank staff reported the anomaly. However, authorities say the extra cargo belonged to private businessmen and 2 international organizations.
For now, our investigations are focusing on government entities and officials who should have done due diligence to ask them why, if this was a chartered plane, why did it carry extra items?
A number of senior bank personnel, including the Director of Currency, Procurement and Security at the central bank, have been held. Customs and Civil Aviation Authority personnel will also be interrogated. Central bank operations still remain uninterrupted. Leon Senyange, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
On to West Africa now. Nigeria's central bank has blocked several accounts that it suspects were being used to fund the smuggling of textile, rice and palm oil. Nigeria's government recently banned the imports of those items for a couple of reasons. One, in order to give room to stimulate local production, but also to limit the outflow of hard currency. Now, such protectionist stances are nothing new in Africa's largest economy, but how sustainable are they really? Here's CGTN's Kelechi Mekalam with this report.
Lovett Samuel is a textile dealer in Nigeria's capital, Abuja. She's been in the business for the past 4 years, splitting the profits to support her family and reinvesting the rest to grow her business. But she's worried the ban on textile imports could put her out of business and hurt her family. Many traders like her support the idea of protecting local industries, but they question the capacity of existing industries to meet market expectations in terms of quality and quantity. Nigeria's textile industry collapsed in early 2000, and by some estimates, some $1.4 billion will be required to revive it.
Even if they want to do it, they should, let's say, start, not to stop all of them, not to bring. They should just establish it first and see what they're doing before they stop. Not they will just stop it at once. No, it will not help us. Another what they will do, they will just start and let's see their own, and they will not stop the people that are bringing it in. No. What they will do to establish it and bring it, they should do so that we see the quality and how their own is before they stop it. Then if we see that yes, we can do it, then they can stop other people.
Even as the government was busy rallying against rice imports, the country spent $160 million on rice imports alone in 2018. The central bank sees such expenditure as wastage of scarce forex. Instead, it's providing more than $100 million as cheap loans to rice farmers to produce rice locally. It has pledged to provide similar schemes for palm oil farmers. The Central Bank of Nigeria says the blocked accounts are being investigated for dumping and economic sabotage. Those found guilty would be banned from owning bank accounts in Nigeria. Kelechi Mekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
All right then, so let's move on to Sudan. Traffic jams have returned to downtown Khartoum, and some shops actually did reopen after protesters demanding civilian rule called off a nationwide civil disobedience campaign. Diplomats from the United States and the African Union are stepping up efforts to find a peaceful solution to the standoff between Sudan's protesters on one hand and the generals in charge at the moment on the other. This comes in the wake of a deadly, fatal crackdown on demonstrators. Organizers of the protests have agreed to resume talks with the generals who ousted the veteran leader Omar Hassan al-Bashir back in April. Several parts of the city suffered from power cuts early on Thursday. Internet services, however, did remain rather erratic. Another country in transition, Algeria's Supreme Court has jailed the former Prime Minister Abdelmalek Sallal in an anti-corruption crackdown. Now, according to the prosecutor's office, Sallal is being investigated for corruption and pilferage of public funds, among other things. The 70-year-old's detention came a day after the former Prime Minister, Ahmed Ouyahia, a leading political figure who was forced out in March, was sent to prison. Sallal is currently facing questioning in cases relating to the waste of public money, abuse of power, and favoritism as well. Earlier this year, mass protests started in Algeria, with the public demanding actually the removal of the ruling elite and the prosecution of people seen as being corrupt. Right, then a quick run through some corporate headlines here for you. Let's start in Nigeria. Process and Industrial Development Limited, or PID. It's a company incorporated in the British Virgin Islands, and it's asking a court in the UK for the right to seize up to $9 billion in assets held by the Nigerian government. That's roughly 20%, remember, of the oil-rich nation's foreign reserves. All of this is due to an aborted gas project. Now, the request is part of a long-running saga. It goes all the way back to 2010. when the Nigerian government agreed to supply gas to a processing plant in Calabar that PNID would build and run. Elsewhere, the British hedge fund Ode Asset Management says it will reject any offer from Barrick Gold for its stake in Acacia Mining that is framed as best and final. Now, the move makes the firm the second Acacia investor to publicly oppose the Canadian mining giant's buyout proposal. According to the fund, a firm offer of this nature by Barrick would impair the ability of Acacia's board to give a robust response that can effect any change. Ode owns nearly 2% of Acacia's outstanding shares. South Africa's Association of Mine Workers and Construction Union, AMCU, is demanding $1,145 a month as a salary for miners in the platinum sector. Now, this comes as wage talks with the biggest producers begin, and it's prompted an angry response from Sibanye-Stillwater. AMCU's demands include provisions around housing, provident funds, transportation, medical aids and other issues as well. The average basic wage for the lowest earners in the platinum sector is $778 a month. And finally, the drinks giant Diageo has terminated a sponsorship deal with a rugby club, London Irish, after the signing of Paddy Jackson, who was acquitted in a rape trial last year. Jackson and former Ulster teammate Stuart Olding were found not guilty of raping a woman in 2016 in Belfast after a night out following their return from Ireland's tour of South Africa. However, both players were sacked from their Ulster and Irish Rugby Football Union contracts in the wake of an internal review in April 2018. That's a run through your company headlines. You're watching Global Business Africa. Time for a short break. Here's what's coming up next. South African authorities have been sued for continued air pollution in the Highveld Priority Area. And the UN mission in South Sudan has wrapped up repairs on some 2,500 kilometers of road.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay, we'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sudan. Hello, Naro.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home, and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference. Welcome back to the program. Insurance claims linked to violent attacks against freight trucks in South Africa have risen by more than a factor of 6 in the first part of this year compared to 2018. Now, the companies have put in claims of about $300,000 between December 2017 and May last year, compared to about $2 million over the exact same period this year. According to one of South Africa's biggest insurers, Hollard, the group has been dealing with much higher claims in monetary terms, and they're mostly related to damage caused by violence during public protests in the last 6 months. Hollard Bureau Operations Manager said that the company received $16 million in claims between last November and May this year. We're still in South Africa, where the authorities are being taken to court because of continued air pollution in the Highveld Priority Area. Now, this part of the country is home to coal-fired power plants, mines and large industries, which, as you're well aware, are all pretty big polluters. The landmark case has been filed in a high court in Pretoria, and it's seen as an important test of South Africa's constitution. With the details, here's CGTN's Sumitra Naidu.
Groundwork and Vukani Environmental Justice Movement in Action are taking government to court over the Air Quality Act. According to the Act, the government has a responsibility to reduce air pollution in order to limit the impact of emissions on the environment and people.
So this case has come about essentially because of the deadly levels of air pollution in the Highveld area, and the fact that people living and working in this area are not breathing in air that is not harmful to their health and well-being. And one of our human rights in our constitution is section 24A of the constitution, which says that everyone has a right to an environment that is not harmful to their health and well-being.
The environmental groups have identified Eskom and Sasol as the main culprits, emitting tons of emissions daily. But they believe the real blame lies with the government for allowing it.
So for every day that the situation continues, we believe it's a direct violation of the Section 24A right, and that the government has both a power and a duty in this situation to take the necessary measures to reduce the air pollution, enforce the plans and various pieces of legislation that apply in order to reduce the air pollution and make sure that there's no longer a breach of this Section 24A right.
The landmark case is an important test of the Constitution and could set an important precedent.
So it is going to be a landmark decision for the environment, and that will help us since South Africa is moving a part of their 5 agenda is there is bioeconomy, and bioeconomy is not just about having economy based on natural resources, but how you reuse your system and how you use them in a more sustainable way. We cannot look at sustainability just in terms of economic empowerment or economic prosperity. We have to also look at for the future generation how we effectively and efficiently use the natural resources for development.
If this application is successful, it will mean a rigorous enforcement and more work for industry, which could result in lower profits. But more importantly, it will mean cleaner air for those most affected. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
The United Nations mission in South Sudan says it has completed repairs on some 2,500 kilometers of roads in the country. South Sudan's road network is one of the worst in the region. Many parts of the country are completely cut off, physically speaking, from the capital of Juba. Many routes are often impassable during the rainy season. CGTN's Patrick Oyet has the latest.
The UN says these engineers from China, Bangladesh, India, Thailand and South Korea have been working intensively. They have been leveling and grading roads across South Sudan for 6 months. They are also repairing supporting infrastructure such as drains and bridges. The UN mission in South Sudan says better roads can promote peace.
When people are able to move from place to place, they meet with each other and they build trust and confidence between communities. In some areas where roads have improved, we have seen a decrease in violence in areas between the groups in those areas and an increase in reconciliation.
Many here say improved access is making an impact on their lives.
This road was very rough, big holes, and even movement is very difficult, especially when we are going with the ambulance, driving from the camp up to Juba. But right now, I appreciate what is going now is good.
With these good roads, it means peace has come. When the road was bad, I could repair my motorbike 6 times travelling from my village to the town. It takes a lot of money, and yet I also have to pay school fees for my children.
The UN says improved roads can enable humanitarian agencies to reach more communities in need. It says it will save millions of dollars traveling by road rather than relying on transporting aid by air. The United Nations mission in South Sudan says it will now be easier to support their bases and deploy peacekeepers more efficiently and effectively. It says it also hopes this initiative will help those returning to their homes after 6 years of conflict to have easy access. Patrick Koyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
Transport experts in Tunisia are calling on the government to work with the private sector to identify solutions to the continent's major transportation problems. It's partly because of that you've got intra-African trade of only about $150 billion in 2017, but in the same year, Africa's trade with the rest of the world was worth over $1 trillion. CGTN's Adin Chouachi with the details.
A study by the Tunisia Africa Business Council, TABC, highlighted that significant investments will be needed to complete land corridors in Africa and reduce costs and transit time in the continent.
It is the first study of this kind in Tunisia. This study is practical because it presents in a detailed manner the challenges and solutions to economic development in Africa.
The study showed that the design of new trade routes in Africa is taking shape, thus from an extrovert African maritime trade, exporting raw materials, the continent is reconfiguring itself around major multimodal and interconnected corridors, thanks to the dynamics of regional and more recently continental integration.
Without direct means of transport and the support of quality maritime, aerial and terrestrial transport to accompany economic operators, there will be no export growth, no exchange development due to current high costs, because we rely on third party for export.
Experts called for the need to operationalize Tunisia's membership of COMESA through public policies to facilitate trade and logistics and to adopt non-conventional territorial strategies to distribute products in Africa.
Tunisia should immediately open a direct maritime line. This was promised in 2018, but not realized yet. Tunisian companies need a direct maritime route to important African cities with which export is increasing, like in Senegal, Ghana and Kenya, to serve the COMESA zone.
In 2018, Tunisia's real GDP reached $40 billion, which represents 1.3% of African GDP.
Tunisian ministers of transport and trade have declared that the government has a clear strategy for developing trade to and from the African market, stressing the importance of addressing the shortage of cargo ships to Africa. Adin Chouachi, CGTN, Tunis.
We're fast approaching 18:30 GMT. Time for another break. Here's what's coming up next. We had more attacks on tankers in the Strait of Hormuz, threatening energy security. And we'll be looking at one of the latest applications of 5G tech in China. It's on public transportation. All that and more coming up shortly.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
Accra is my kind of city. That's because when I'm here, I feel like I'm back home in Lagos or Abidjan, which are two of the major cities I grew up in.
Business in Africa is high risk.
After about a decade covering business news on the continent, I've learned it's all about the high risk, but also the high returns and the high energy. You simply have to adjust in order to keep pace. When I started out as a journalist, my dream was to open people's minds to the different perspectives. From the CEO in the boardroom to the trader out in the street, we all have different stories. From Accra to Addis Ababa, from Cairo to Cape Town, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Here at CGTN, we realize that Africa is on the move, and it's moving fast, but we're moving right along with it. I'm Ucheo Koronkwo, and I'm a business anchor and reporter at CGTN.
Welcome back. Let's take a look at the stories making your headlines at this hour. Islamic State's West African branch is claiming responsibility for an attack on a Nigerian army base. The assault took place in Borno State in northeastern Nigeria. The group is claiming to have killed 20 soldiers in that attack. It also claims that barracks were burnt and tanks destroyed. Islamic State in West Africa, or ISWA if you prefer, split from Boko Haram back in 2016. The Nigerian army is said to respond to these claims from this terrorist group. Uganda in East Africa started the second round of vaccination to more frontline workers after 2 people died of Ebola. The vaccine will be given to health workers in districts that border the Democratic Republic of Congo, where the disease has been running rampant for the last 10 months now. Around 5,000 health workers have already received this vaccine. Sudan's ruling Transitional Military Council now says it has rejected a request by Ethiopia to hold talks with opposition groups in Addis Ababa. This comes a day after the council announced a reshuffle after 70 officers in the Sudanese military were accused of plotting a coup. And finally, the Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi says Egypt's support to the Libyan National Army Forces remains unchanged. Cairo is vowed to continue assisting the LNA's counter-terror campaign against Western Libyan militias that support the government of national accord. El-Sisi's announcement came during a meeting in Cairo with the Speaker of the Libyan Eastern Parliament, Aguila Saleh. At the run through your headlines. All right, then on to one of the big stories that's roiling the oil markets. The US government is accusing Iran of being behind explosions that damaged 2 large crude carriers in the Gulf of Oman on Thursday. Now, the Iranian administration has denied any involvement whatsoever, despite a US military video that the US says shows Iranian special forces removing an unexploded mine from the side of one of the tankers that were essentially the target of those attacks on Thursday. Now, Thursday's attacks increased tensions between the 2 countries, which are currently locked in a standoff after Washington imposed economic sanctions on Tehran in an attempt to force the renegotiation of a 2015 Iranian nuclear deal. It also stoked concern about reduced flows of crude oil on one of the world's key shipping routes, and that pushed up prices, at least in the US, by as much as 4.5% in trading on Thursday. Got a bit to get through on this story. Let's get the latest from the markets from Leah Duncan. She joins us now live from New York. So, Leah, the U.S. Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, he's accused Iran, as he just mentioned, of being behind these latest attacks in the Strait of Hormuz. But what is his evidence?
Well, Washington did release a video that it said showed Iran's Revolutionary Guards were behind the attacks that struck the Norwegian-owned Front Altair and the Japanese-owned Kokuka Courageous in the Gulf of Oman. The U.S. military said black and white footage it filmed from a U.S. aircraft showed Iran's guards on one of their patrol boats drawing up to the Kokuka Courageous and removing an unexploded mine from its hull. The military's Central Command also released images showing the apparent mine, which attaches to the side of a ship magnetically before it was removed. Additionally, Central Command also offered a detailed chronology of events, starting with U.S. Navy forces getting distress calls from the vessels, both as we've learned and heard, suffered explosions, forcing crews to abandon ship and leave them adrift. Now, Iran has called the accusations alarming, and its foreign ministry spokesman said it is blaming it, that is quote, the simplest and most convenient way for Pompeo and other U.S. officials. Now, according to Reuters reporting, the firm that chartered the Kukuka Courageous tanker said it was hit by a suspected torpedo, but a person with knowledge of the matter said that was not the case, so conflicting stories there. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said that the truth needed to be established. He told the UN Security Council on Thursday that the world cannot afford a major confrontation in the Gulf region. Now, as we know, Washington has blamed Iran or its proxies for attacks back on May 12th that crippled 4 oil tankers in that same area. It also said it was behind May 14th drone strikes.
Indeed. So Iran, as you pointed out, they repeatedly deny being behind these attacks. But from Tehran, we've also heard repeated threats to shut down oil traffic through the Strait of Hormuz if they want to. So assuming, for the sake of argument, that a blockade does happen, how would oil markets react?
Well, I want to start off, Ramah, by saying that today President Trump said as well that Iran is in fact behind the attacks and that the Strait of Hormuz would not be closed, or at least if it is closed, it won't be for long. But as for crude oil prices, they spiked more than 4% after the attacks on Thursday. Later settled higher by about 2% or so. They're up another 1% or so today. But as we know, the Strait is crucial. It is a place where about 1/5 of the oil consumed globally passes through, some 17.4 million barrels per day versus consumption of about 100 million barrels per day in 2018, according to one data analytics firm. Now, I spoke to Robert Yager at Missouri Americas. He thinks it would be virtually impossible to close it, but if it does happen, he says we could see a rally by at least $10 if it is for an extended period of time. If it's for a shorter time frame, he thinks perhaps we could see a rally in prices of $2, $3, or even $4. But he pointed to the fact that there's just too much economic interest there to allow it to be shut down. And that's the overall sense that I have been getting. But one other thing that I want to point out, Ramah, is that ship insurers, they are saying that insurance costs for ships sailing through the Middle East have increased by at least 10% after the attacks, and there's potential for costs to rise further if things continue to escalate.
Indeed, and of course, all those costs get loaded onto us, the end consumer. One last question for you, Leah. So the U.S. at the moment is the world's largest producer of oil, but WTI crude, that benchmark price has been falling rather steeply in this quarter, down at least 13%. What's happening? What explains that decline?
You're absolutely right. Oil prices have been very depressed and suppressed despite that bounce in prices that we are seeing yesterday and today as a result of the attacks, that is. Prices are still on track to post a loss this week, and that's largely on fears around the trade dispute between the United States and China, and those concerns around global oil demand there. Now, added to that, worries about slumping demand, Brexit, wider geopolitical uncertainty, and you get a lot of pressure on prices. Now, the International Energy Agency, it cut its demand growth forecast for 2019 by 100,000 barrels per day to 1.2 million barrels per day, citing worsening prospects for world trade. OPEC also cut its 2019 forecast for growth in global oil demand, even lower than IEA, to 1.14 million barrels per day. And as for analysts, they have also revised global oil demand growth forecast lower after the U.S.-China trade war escalated. And just this week, we heard from consulting firm, that energy firm, FGE, and British bank Barclays, they just this week revised down their global oil demand growth forecast to around 1 million barrels per day from 1.3 million barrels per day. So demand is being hurt by trade worries, which is in turn hurting prices. Ramah, back in April, Brent crude hit about $75. Right now, it's around $62, and that is factoring in the bounce that we got yesterday and today. So despite, some easing that we're seeing over the last couple of days, there are a lot of pressure on prices, trade, hurting growth, hurting demand.
indeed. And of course, at this point in time, WTI futures for July 52.51, up about 0.4%. Leah Duncan in New York. Thank you very much. Now, when the Trump administration decided to raise tariffs on Chinese imports again in May, American businesses and consumers were the ones who are really taking the hit here. Tariffs that were initially set at 10% on $200 billion worth of imports from across the Pacific Ocean, then went up to 25%. CGTN's Mark New now reports furniture retailers among those who've had to adjust.
In the California Central Valley city of Modesto, it's business as usual for the furniture market.
See how this has a wood base?
As customers look for the best fit, it's also not hard to notice something else on display. Fresh signs indicating a new price hike and the reason why.
The importer pays the duty and the tariff. He passes his increased costs on to me, and then I pass them on to the consumer. And the consumer, if I just put it into the price of the product, they wouldn't know they're paying a tariff, because our president and his staff are telling the United States citizens that tariffs don't affect them. They don't pay them. China's paying them, and China isn't paying. They are paying it.
He's an honest man, too. He's telling you, hey, this is the reason why it's going up. But yeah, I mean, we're in need of a couch, and we're probably going to get it today instead of a week from now when it goes up a little bit further,
This table is 100% from China.
Because it's so difficult to know how every part of the thousands of furniture pieces have been impacted, O'Brien has averaged it out to a 3.75% increase on all items sold. And here at the furniture market, there's no hiding the numbers. This is a customer's recent sales order. Clearly in a line item it says tariff 3.75%, adding $73.46 to this bill. At the family's other store, At Home, O'Brien's wife, Pamela, is taking a different approach.
And every day I'm opening a letter and it's like another price increase, another price increase.
With furniture and hundreds of accessories, At Home is attempting to avoid the politics of the situation by striking a balance in the amount prices are raised.
Even though it's a 25% increase, we're not going to charge that all to you. We're going to absorb some of it. But in a sense, it is a tax. It's a tax.
Pamela O'Brien estimates that at least 90% of her items have been impacted, even ones that say Made in America.
I called up the manufacturer. I'm like, well, why do we have price increase? And then he explained, he said, well, it's built here in the United States, kind of like, but I get parts from all over the world. But when you look at the down is made in China.
Francis O'Brien says many furniture manufacturers have moved operations out of China to places like Vietnam and Cambodia to avoid costs. He believes that will hurt China, but he's also concerned about long-term damage to U.S. business.
China, once their economy grows and their standard of living increases, they're going to be a huge market for us, and we're going to want to be able to sell into that market. And if we burn our bridges now, I don't know what's going to happen, 30 or 40 years from now.
O'Brien does not believe he's lost any purchases so far by highlighting the cost of the tariffs, but he just wants the customer to know that in a trade war, there's a price to pay, and much of that comes right out of their own pocket.
Finish these hides in China.
Mark New, CGTN, Modesto, California.
Now, a different perspective on that trade dispute between the world's two largest economies. Tsinghua University held a symposium focusing on trade and investment links between the world's top two economies, China and the US. Now, the event examined the impact of this ongoing trade war on both sides, but also on the global economy. CGTN's Su Yuting was there.
Scholars and experts believe no one will benefit from the trade tensions between China and the US. Li Daokui, director of the Academic Center for Chinese Economic Practice and Thinking at Tsinghua University, hosted the discussion. He said that as a growing engine of the world economy, China is taking responsibility for safeguarding the global free trade system and making efforts to stabilize the world economy. Other experts said that for China, it is crucial for domestic businesses to diversify in foreign trade markets to promote greater opening up.
In terms of the Chinese people and Chinese government, are very, I think, very determined to avoid the further deteriorating of the two countries' trade disputes. And so we certainly wanted to collaborate. We certainly wanted to be more open. And I think that has already demonstrated through many of the recent policy measures and in China and the further policy to reform.
In the name of protecting domestic industries, Washington has placed steep tariffs on billions of US dollars worth of products from China, a heavy blow to the two countries' economic and trade relations. Experts said both China and the US play important roles in the global industrial chain, supply chain, and value chain, adding that the escalation of trade frictions will surely disrupt the existing world economic chain and lead to chaos in the global market.
The uncertainty created by the trade friction is extremely harmful to both economies. For example, to the U.S., some of the measures taken by the U.S. government will disrupt the global value chain. And those U.S. companies on the global value chain, they may supply to the value chain, and they face uncertainty as well.
China and the US are now each other's largest trading partner and important investment destination. The past and reality have proven that as the world's two largest economies, China and the US stand to benefit from cooperation and lose from confrontation. And experts believe that cooperation is the best choice for both sides. Su Yuting, CGTN, Beijing.
Now, given its incredible speed and minimal latency, 5G is regarded as an important pillar for commerce in the world's second largest economy. The country's largest private automaker, Geely, along with China Mobile and other tech firms, have unveiled a 5G bus. Here's CGTN's Wu Lei examining how this tech can make daily transportation safer and more efficient.
With more cars on the road, passengers are suffering from headaches over traffic jams, and now expect more intelligent and safer public transportation. After being equipped with the latest 5G technology and Internet of Things facilities, this bus has become one of the most intelligent and efficient vehicles on the road. With the help of facial recognition technologies on this bus, passengers don't have to pay in cash, in cards or mobile phones. They can just pay with their face. And of course, if any wanted criminals appear on the bus, the control center will take actions immediately. After installing 5G-enabled advanced driver assistance systems on this bus, the detectors and cameras will send the data back to this screen, helping drivers detect pedestrians and understand the surrounding environment, including any collision possibilities. Following the 5G technology upgrade, this driver monitoring camera will detect a driver's status and send it back to the control center in real time. This system will help keep the drivers and this area as secure as possible. The 5G network will not only provide faster download speed, but also guarantee the mass connectivity. There are around 20 smart cameras on the bus, and the control center will know whether it is crowded inside the bus, and the positioning system will tell which route is the best and efficient one. They can adjust the traffic accordingly. This 5G bus is a joint effort of several companies, including Geely Group, China Mobile, Huawei Technologies, and others. One of the most anticipated products under the 5G network is autonomous driving. And of course, that will need more collaboration between automakers and tech companies. That's because the cars, the technologies, and all the related facilities need to be updated and adjusted accordingly. Wu Lei, CGTN, Hangzhou.
Speaking of tech and cars in particular, Tesla CEO Elon Musk says that in future, cars from the company will have racing games installed that you can control from the driver's seat. If you're looking forward to the titles, it's Beach Buggy Racing 2 and Fallout Shelter as well. Now, there are 3D off-road kart racing games which run on multiple platforms: Android, the PlayStation 4, Nintendo Switch console. But the games are sort of familiar to Mario Kart. That's probably the closest equivalent you can come to here, where players drive a buggy through different settings like beaches and towns and so on. The tech entrepreneur made that announcement. Where else? At this year's edition of E3 over in Los Angeles. He is yet to reveal when they're coming to market.
Part of the reason I got interested in technology, maybe the reason, was video games. So, probably wouldn't have started programming if it wasn't for video games, or wouldn't have been as interested in computers and technology if it wasn't for video games. So I think actually video games are a very powerful force for getting young kids interested in technology. The general principle is like, how do we, what can we do to make the car the most fun possible? and like, what would what other cars just don't have, you know? And so it seems like, well, you know, if there's like you're just parked somewhere waiting for somebody, finish an appointment, or if you're on a road trip, it'd be pretty cool if you just like, you know, go to the car screen and play some fun game. And we're just exploring, like, you know, how do we make it as fun as possible?
And in case you're wondering, the other guy on that panel was Ten Howard of Bethesda. Now, quick run through commodity prices here for you. Picking up on something that Leah mentioned in the conversation had a little earlier today. Lots of interesting data coming out. The EIA, for instance, trimming its oil forecast into 2020, but it's forecasting that oil supply next year will actually be growing at a much faster pace than demand, outpacing it by about 900,000 or so barrels a day. And the bulk of that supply is coming from the US, effectively putting OPEC into an interesting catch-22. Do you cut supply, see higher prices, bring in more output, and the US and Russia benefiting? Or do you stay the course and keep losing market share? We'll find out, won't we? Here's what's coming up next. More tech news coming up. We'll be looking at a chatbot that will help you navigate your way around Lagos. Welcome back. Let's head over to South Africa. In a country where the unemployment rate is over 27%, and that's just a general number, not the youth unemployment one, and economic growth is under 2%, it's been under that level for years now, jobs are pretty hard to come by. But solving that problem was the focus of the Gauteng Youth Expo. It's an annual event that brings together representatives from the public and the private sectors to expose young South Africans to a variety of academic, career, and business opportunities. CGTN's Yolis Njamela was there.
June is recognized as Youth Month here in South Africa. Since the dawn of democracy back in 1994, Youth Day and Youth Month are utilized to highlight the challenges that affect young people here in South Africa. This Youth Expo forms part of the provincial government's flagship initiative to empower the young people in the country's economic hub, Gauteng province.
They come here under one roof, more than 200 exhibitors, grab the exhibitor that meets your desires, let your life change. You can't come in here and go out and remain the same. It will never happen. So we just want young people to explore this opportunity and take advantage of the investment they've put for them.
Hundreds of young people hungry for economic and career opportunities got to explore what's on offer. For many of them, this expo is an eye-opener.
So far I've learned a lot, and I'm seeing things that I am interested in. My career was doing aviation, but I lost interest in aviation because I didn't do science. But coming back to it, it showed me that I can do aviation, but with maths, and luckily I'm doing maths.
I've gotten more information about nursing as I want to do nursing, and that I have to supplement my maths if it's poor, if it hasn't reached the requirements. And then I found out more about the forensic side because I want to do forensics too.
It's been great and very helpful because now I have a real good idea of what I want to do next year. And I've found different opportunities. I registered almost everywhere, but now I know where I exactly want to go and what I want to study. Because coming here, I didn't have any idea of what I want to do next year.
The youths are the highest unemployed in this country, and it's no surprise that high school learners lined up to access information on careers. In line with South Africa's stated intention and desire to be a leader in the advent of the fourth industrial revolution, most exhibitors here are showcasing 4IR technologies.
Basically, it's just to prepare the kids for the fourth industrial revolution. So if we can start them at a very young age, from as little as 5-6 years old, I believe they stand a great opportunity to have an idea when they venture into varsity.
This expo is held on an annual basis to assist students. Yudis Njomela for CGTN in Soweto, South Africa.
Our last story for you comes out of Nigeria. Gridlock, traffic congestion, pollution. These are just some of the transportation challenges that have caused a major headache for policymakers and ordinary citizens like you and I, particularly in large cities. But in one of Africa's megacities, though, there are efforts to try and change that through tech. The tech in question is an app called Lara, and it's helping millions of commuters in Lagos get from point A to point B, as CGTN's Dirty Badmus now explains.
It's been hailed as an app that is helping to solve some of the transportation challenges in Lagos in a very unique way. For the millions of residents who use the city's public transportation system, Lara, as the app is called, is helping them to navigate the city knowing exactly how much the fare is. It's the creation of 3 young men who say their initial motivation was to help solve a noticeable transportation challenge in Lagos.
It's a chatbot that's built to help people with the local public transit directions. At its core, the company's mission here is to build solutions that help people plan, commute, and connect better on their trips. And Lara, it's just a chatbot that shows a whole lot to effect of what she does.
Google Maps is it's mainly focused on giving people driving directions around the city. In other more developed cities, they have public transit directions as well as fare codes. But in developing cities like ours, where that information is not available, that's where we come in, and that's the distinguishing factor for us. So we are able to provide public transportation modes from, shuttle buses, downfall, to, Okadas, which are bikes, bike taxis, ferries, and everything. So we provide all that public transit information and also include fare codes and time estimates.
Building the database needed to drive the chatbot was not an easy task and took some time to get the needed information to feed into the app.
A lot of manual on-ground work actually has to go into place, and as you already said, using local knowledge as well to hyper-local knowledge is one very key resource. But I think a key resource as well is having the skill sets to know how to acquire this data and also to maintain this data.
Lara.ng works just like popular messaging apps WhatsApp and WeChat. The difference is that rather than exchange messages person to person, you would be doing so with Lara, the chatbot, which is basically an AI. Once logged onto Lara.ng, the process is quite simple. Just enter your start location and destination, and Lara would work out the navigational guide providing different transport options, the fare, and the estimated time of travel. It's just as simple as that. Lara now covers 3 cities in Nigeria and 2 outside the country. Over 10,000 people now visit Lara.ng every day. But Samuel and his co-founders are aiming higher.
We have talked to people that have said this is a problem in Brazil, this is a problem in Thailand, this is a problem in many other continents around the world. So yes, we are starting in Africa because that's what we know best and because that's what we're most passionate about, but we have aspirations to go elsewhere as well.
The first time I came to this city, in order to move from one point to another, I had to ask for directions a lot, even from strangers. And to be candid, that can be discomforting. But first-timers don't really need to bother themselves about that anymore. All you just need to do is simply ask Lara. Dirty Badmus, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
All right, and a quick run through the currencies here for you, rather currency-related information. This time from East Africa, barely a day after presenting the proposals on taxes and spending for the 2019-2020 fiscal year, which starts in about 2 weeks, Kenya's also raised fuel prices today. Now, the bulk of that price hike is mainly due to changes in the landed cost of fuel. It's actually gone up by about 32% between February and June. Definitely a negative factor as far as inflation is concerned. But that's it for the currencies and indeed for Global Business Africa here on this edition of Global Business Africa. We'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen on the program in the last hour. Several ways of getting your thoughts back to us. All of them are on your screens right now. I'm Ramah Nyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your company in the last hour. The World Today is up next from Washington, D.C.